So I don't know if you've heard the old adage, it's not polite to talk about religion, sex, and politics. I promise for the next 3 weeks, I will not talk about politics. That's the only thing I promise you. I want to give us this thought experiment as we dive into this. Can you imagine that there were aliens, and the aliens sent out a scout to planet Earth, and they were wanted to understand what makes humans tick? What are they obsessed with? What do they worship? What do they talk about all the time? What are their lives centered around? And so this alien scout's going through the earth, and they're like, you know what? I got my report back. Here it is. He tells his boss. They're obsessed with these little screens, and their necks are bent down like this all the time, and their thumbs are very strong because they're obsessed with these smartphone things. He'd also have a section in his report saying there's this savory, smoky, salty food called bacon, and they do strange things to bacon. It started in state fairs, but it's made its way into restaurants, and you can't go through a drive-thru now without bacon on top of bacon. I imagine they'd say something along the lines of that, but I also imagine that they say, they are obsessed with sex. They sing about it. All the songs seem to be about love and sex. They have songs that are complete odes to the anatomy of the other gender all the time. I mean, it's all their media, their stories, their movies, their TV shows. It's all centered around who's having sex and if they're not having sex. And if people like each other, they must immediately have sex in the show or they don't really like each other. I mean, this is around the way that we dress, the way that we talk, the things that we engage with in our entertainment, what we look at on our phones. The human race, all of us are a part of this, that we're obsessed with sexuality. And just one note before we dive into the rest of the topic, just a note on singleness. Maybe you are here this morning, maybe you're watching online, and you are in a season of singleness. Maybe for you, it's not your choice, but you're why in the world are we why should I even pay attention to this singleness? If I am single, why should I pay attention to sex at all? Or maybe it's not your choice, or maybe it is your choice, and you just don't want to be coupled up. I just want to say a few things to you. If you're here, if you are single, you are not less than. I think that the church has perpetuated this narrative that life is all about coupling up and it's all about just married people with kids for so long. And so the church has not been a safe, welcoming place to single people. And that's not what we want Bridgeway to be at all. So if you're single, man, we see you. Actually, the New Testament speaks specifically and highly about singleness, calling it a really high calling on your life. So whether you chose it or not, the season that you're in is sacred. But for most people, there is this innate desire, these innate feelings, these innate urges for us as human beings to be with the other and for us to express our sexuality. I mean, that's just most people. So we're going to spend most of our time talking about that. Now, the reality is, I grew up in church. I was there on Wednesdays. I was there on Sunday mornings, Sunday nights. I was born on a pew, basically. And if you don't know what a pew is, good for you for not knowing that torture device our grandparents gave us, right? But, sex was not really talked about in church when I was growing up. Or it was talked about in a way where it was a finger-wagging kind of evil, gross, dirty thing. And it seems to be taboo still today for faith communities to talk about sex. And so maybe it's just the punk rock nature of who I am, but I feel like if I was told it was off limits to talk about, we're going to go there at Bridgeway a little bit. And so I want to talk about, to set this up, I want to talk about there have been two main stories that I think that we have been told about human sexuality. And I think neither of them really hit the mark. And I think both of them do some harm, do some damage. And so my hope is that we're able to tell a better story and live a better story with our sexuality through us being on this journey together in this series. The first story that I think we're told, and this is maybe you might call this the back of the school bus story where you first learned about sex, but it's just the culture's story of sex, just the narrative about what sex is, what human sexuality is, and how we're supposed to thrive inside of it. And I think this cultural narrative just tells us this, that it's just sex. It's just a physical exchange between two people. It's a casual thing. I mean, how are you going to know if you're compatible with somebody if you don't have sex with them? How are you going to lock them down in a relationship unless you have sex with them? I mean, this is just a casual thing. I mean, this is in our music, right? You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals. It's just this animalistic kind of desire, and it's not sacred. There's nothing else going on. It's just a casual thing. And I think this is ultimately what our culture is telling us about sexuality. But, even if you're not a church person, a Jesus follower, like there's something inside of you that knows it's more than just a physical act, right? And we know this because if you've broken up with somebody after having sex with them, or you've been divorced after that was a part of your marriage relationship, the pain that you feel from that separation from that person, it's different than if you just talked and went to dinner one time and didn't call back, right? There's this level of intimacy and trust that's built because I believe it's more than just a physical thing. There's another dimension and layer to it. This is why when we hear about cheating and infidelity, and why there's a different level of cheating and infidelity when somebody slept with another person when they were your partner, they were your spouse. This is why when we hear about sexual abuse, we recoil in a special way, right? Physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse are all evil things. But when somebody has been mistreated and abused sexually, it is a different animal, isn't it? It is something that we recoil against because there's something inside us that knows that this is not just a physical thing. This is a sacred, spiritual topic as well. But our culture tells us that it's just sex and that it's not a big deal at all. Now, there's another story, and this is the story that I was brought up with, and we'll just call this the purity culture story. You see, back in the 60s and 70s when our culture was moving out of the Vietnam War, and it was this hippie time in our cultural history where it was the free love movement. It was pushing that cultural story that sex is nothing but sex, free love, I like you, you like me, so and that was the whole story. And there were a bunch of Christians, especially evangelical Christians who are from my tribe, who said, we need to do something to make sure that teenagers are practicing abstinence and they're not having sex and that they're waiting until they're married and being in a marriage covenant to have sex. Which sidebar I believe is the best context for our sexuality to be expressed to another person is in the context of a marriage relationship between you and your partner and God in the center of it. That is the best context for our sexuality to be expressed, right? And our purity culture story believed that. I just think that there were a lot of unintended consequences to the way that sexuality was expressed and talked about inside of our churches specifically. Purity culture taught many, many things. And the story that it told was that your virginity equaled your purity. And you wanted to make sure that you were pure before God. And so it elevated this idea of virginity as like the end-all, be-all of our culture, especially for teenagers. And it said if you lose your virginity, you are less than. You are a second-class citizen. You have lost a precious gift that can never be given back to you. And there was shame and there was guilt attached to it. Purity culture taught us this, that sex is a bad thing. Sex bad, sex bad, sex bad, sin, 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 until your wedding night, then it's supposed to be all amazing. It presented this picture of if you wait and don't have sex until your wedding night, then your wedding night's gonna be amazing and it won't be awkward at all. Hashtag not true. And we've sold this bill of goods that just wasn't true. And there was some psychological aspect to saying sex, sin, sex bad for so long that our mind could not just flip a switch and think of sex as anything more than a guilt-ridden, shame-ridden thing. It's like the purity culture was trying to create a bunch of angels, but humans, we're not animals, we're not angels, we're something sacred and beautiful in between. There were so many problems with this purity culture story that at least I had expressed to me when I was in the 90s growing up in church. Women were dehumanized. Women were just treated as an outlet for a man. And men were dehumanized. Men were treated like insatiable animals that could not control our eyes or our hands, especially around bikinis or yoga pants. Like we couldn't control it. And women were the problem always, and men were animals that had no responsibility and couldn't control ourselves. Purity culture was a problematic story because people who had been sexually sinned against, people who had been sexually abused, who were no longer virgins, there was no place for them in this story. Because they had lost their one shot, and so they felt like they were second-class citizens, that they were broken, that God did not love them, and God did not have a plan for them. Purity culture didn't speak to people that struggled with infertility after marriage. Maybe they waited until their wedding night, and they're supposed to have this beautiful fairy tale life, and then they couldn't have children. What went wrong? Or people that chose to be single or celibate with their lives. Where were they in this story? It was amazing how much shame, how much guilt, how much hiding, how much of abuse happened because of the purity culture narrative. Not only that, but studies show that like 93% of all teenagers have a sexual experience before they're married. Purity culture speaks nothing to people that have crossed a line that they promised they wouldn't cross. And so they find themselves in limbo. They find themselves wondering where God's plan is for their life. And they might just start hiding even more and start thinking that sex is just a guilty, shameful thing, even more. One story, the culture story, says sex is nothing. It doesn't matter. It's just a physical thing. The other story says, you better not have sex. You better not have sex. You better not have sex because don't you love God? Don't you want to go to heaven when you die? And what I want to do for the next couple weeks is I want to tell a different story. I want to help us and equip you and empower you to tell a better story, to live and believe a better story about sexuality. One that helps us faithfully thrive in the kingdom way of Jesus and understanding that we are sexual beings and we were created that way by our God. And we've got to get this right, you guys. I want to just make my case for why we've got to tell a better story about sexuality. Because most of the time, sex, when it's talked about in church, if it's ever talked about, it's only talked about as a moral code. It's a thou shalt not thing. It's a finger-waving thing. It's a warning shot thing. Don't do this. Don't do that. And I want to widen our perspectives a little bit and see sex in a different light because it's more than just a moral code to follow. I don't know about you, but I've never heard a sermon series about how we can faithfully thrive in the kingdom way of Jesus and apply our spirituality to the marital bedroom, to the way that we express our sexuality and the way that we honor other people. And I think it's time that we have that conversation. And maybe for you, you're like checking out already. I mean, maybe you came because you're just like, I can't believe this pastor, what's he gonna do? He's gonna get canceled. Oh my gosh, it's gonna be crazy. But maybe you're checking out because you're like, this doesn't apply to me. Sex is not on the forefront of my mind. I'm in a season of singleness, or I am going to be single, and I don't really care about this stuff anymore. Or I've been married, and so I don't have to worry because I don't have to worry about having sex outside of marriage anymore because I'm in marriage now. Like, you might be saying all those things, but hear me. This is why this matters to you, no matter where you are, because we've got to get this right, and we've got to tell a better story for our kids and our grandkids. Because our kids and some of us, our grandkids, they have been sold and they are being sold a bill of goods about their sexuality that is broke, that is going to lead them to dehumanizing themselves and dehumanizing others, and it's going to lead them to harm of themselves and a less than what God dreamed for them life. And you know what? I want to get it right for my boys, and I want you to get it right for your kids, to share a different story because there's a better story to be told. And I'm not making up anything new. We're going to go all the way back to see the original story of what God says about sex and what he says about us being sexual beings. We've got to get this right, you guys. And I hope this is a step in the right direction. So let's go to the text. Let's go to what God says about it. Let's go to the very beginning of the story in the book of Genesis. Let's go chapter 1 of the book of Genesis. We're going to see the very first command that God in heaven gave his human project, the very first man and woman. And you might assume when you think about God giving commands, it's like, thou shalt not do this, or don't go there, don't touch that, don't look at that. It's all these like prohibitions against the way that we're supposed to live. That's ultimately how we think about laws and commands all the time, right? But check out the very first thing after the creation of the first man and woman in this beautiful poem that we're given. What's the first command recorded in scriptures, you guys? It's this right here. And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. In other words, get busy getting busy is the very first command given to us by God. Come on, you got to laugh a little bit. We're not going to go very far if we don't have a little bit of laughter this morning, right? This is the very first thing that God said. What does this say about God? So many of us think that God is this cosmic killjoy if he's real. He's just out there saying, ooh, that looks like fun. Don't. That's not who God is. From the very beginning, we're told that this is a beautiful thing, and it's something that God has commanded us to do. Just 3 chapters later in the story, we find these first humans, Adam and Eve, and we're told there's this way that they are expressing themselves sexually that was, beautiful and commended by God. We're told this in a couple places. Now, Adam knew Eve, his wife, knew, wink, wink, hint, hint, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I've gotten a man with the help of the Lord. A few verses later, and Adam knew his wife again. But if knowing is just about knowledge, how could you know someone again? I don't know. And she bore a son son and called his name Seth. So we see how in these ancient texts, you guys, that are like 8,000 to 10,000 years old, like from the very first humans in the story that God gave us, Adam knew Eve and this sexual element of the relationship, and then children came. Which is weird enough that they use the word to know here, but what's fascinating to me is in the very next book of the Bible, the book of Exodus, we see that God's people, they're in slavery to the Egyptians, and they've been crying out to God to help them, and then God finally hears their cry, but this word to know, knew, it pops up again, right? Let's check out Exodus here. Exodus chapter 2. The people of Israel, God's people, groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God, there's that word again, what? Knew them? That God knew them is the same word that's used for Adam knew Eve and bore a child. Eve knew Adam and bore another child. What is going on here? I think this word to know, this verb, there's more going on underneath the surface. It's actually the Hebrew word yada. Let's practice a little Hebrew together. Yada on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Yada. It's like yada, yada, yada. But it's kind of like a little bit of a sensual word here in the way that it's used with Adam and Eve. The actual Hebrew definition is to have intimate, firsthand knowledge or to see completely. Adam knew Eve. He yada'd her. They had intimate, firsthand knowledge of each other. They saw each other completely. God heard the cry. He knew his people and heard their cry when they were in slavery. He saw them, intimate, firsthand knowledge, and he saw his people in slavery completely. What is going on here, right? I think it's an interesting thing. When I was growing up, just like a middle schooler reading the Bible, and I would find those like verses that said that somebody knew somebody, and like, you know, it's like, hey, first off, ladies, if any guy or creep comes up to you and goes, hey, I'd like to know you in a biblical way, run. But I would find those verses where it said somebody knew somebody, and it was always this interesting thing. I'm like, oh, the Bible's so prudish. They won't just say to sleep with somebody, right? They got to say knew. It was like this cleaned up way of doing it. But you know what? The older I get, the more that I study about God and about humanity, like, man, I think this yadad definition is actually a better definition for what sexuality is really all about. It's not prudish. It's actually getting down to what's really going on. Let's put that definition up one more time. Yada, to have intimate, firsthand knowledge, to not just know in our minds, but to know with our bodies, with our minds, with our spirits about somebody, to see them completely. Sexuality is about intimacy and being seen and seeing the other. And I think that's what the scriptures are, what's coming across to us here, which is amazing. And not only in the book of Genesis, but throughout the Hebrew scriptures, we come across this really interesting collection of poetry called the Song of Songs. And if you've ever been reading the Bible and you get to the Song of Songs, you're like, what am I reading, right? Because some scholars believe it's like an allegory for like God's love for his church or Jesus' love for the church. And I would just say, like, I could see that a little bit, but things get a little weird because this is a collection of, I'm just going to say it, erotic poetry about a marriage relationship between a man and a woman. This is such erotic, sexually charged poetry that young Jewish boys could not read it until they were 13 and they had their bar mitzvah because their minds would just go into all these different places because it was just like so sexually charged. And so there's some like cultural baggage that we need to walk through, but this is some pretty like sultry stuff. Like, for example, here's a couple of things here. It might not come to you as sexual talk, but it was in the first century or back in the Old Testament times. It says, her teeth are like a flock of sheep just shorn coming up from the washing. Ooh. I don't know how the lights are going to turn on that, but maybe it works. And then here's one for me. This is what Megan says to me sometimes. His legs are alabaster columns set on bases of gold. I don't know why I went to Ron Burgundy voice there. His appearance is like Lebanon choice as the cedars. It smells of rich mahogany or something like that. This is kind of the language, but this is that romantic, sexually charged stuff going on. What's interesting in the book of Song of Songs, we are told, and this is in your Bible, this is in my Bible, about this beautiful gift of sexuality that to be expressed through a loving marriage relationship. Now, and they talk about this love. Now, you and I, we get a lot of mileage out of the word love in our culture, right? Oh, we say, oh, I love you, honey, or to our spouse. We say, I love you to our children. Then we also say, I love tacos. I love Mountain Dew. Like whatever it might be, like we say those things, it's the same word. Now in the Hebrew, there are actually multiple words used for the word love. And I think as we look at these dimensions to the word love that show up in the Song of Songs, we see what true sexuality and true commitment and true love actually looks like. Because all three of these words for love in the Hebrew show up here in the Song of Songs. So check out this first one here. This is in Song of Songs, chapter 4. This is Solomon talking to his wife. He says, "You are altogether beautiful, my darling," or my love. "There is no flaw in you." And the word translated here, translated away to my darling or my love, is the Hebrew word raya. Raya. On the count of three, can you guys say raya with me? 1, 2, 3. Raya. And raya is this beautiful camaraderie, this beautiful friendship of love that we are seeing here. It's this idea that I trust you. And there's like this shared interest and like, you know what, I like what you bring to the world. I like spending time with you. It's that baseline of all beautiful relationships of, oh, we're just great friends, and I like being with her. I think back to Megan and I, when we first started dating, we were in high school. We're weird high school sweethearts. Make fun of us all you want. It worked for us. We've been married for like 13 years, so take that, mom and dad or whoever else said. That's not actually a thing, but anyway, we were like juniors in high school, and I remember we were dating, and I would like make her a mix CD. And some of you guys don't even know what a CD is or a mix. It's a playlist or whatever. But I make her like a mix CD of one of my favorite artists, and I'd be like, "Hey, I'll drop it off after school. Tell me what you think about track 9. That one's for you, girl." Like something like that. And I remember like we would text and we would talk on the phone afterwards about what she thought about the music and what she thought about the lyrics. And I just remember thinking, I'm picking up what she's putting down. Like, she is so cool. She's so cool. I like spending time with her. We like some of the same things, and I trust her, and I think there's something here. And it was that raya, that kind of friendship layer of love that all the greatest relationships are based out of. And we see in the Song of Songs, like when you see this phrase, my darling, it's that raya, that camaraderie, that friendship, that companionship layer of love. But you also see other layers of love. The next layer of love that we see is ahava. Can you guys say ahava on the count of 3? 1, 2, 3. Ahava, that's good. And we see this here in Song of Songs chapter 8. Many waters cannot quench ahava, love, neither can floods drown it. If a man offered for ahava, love, all the wealth of his house, he would be utterly despised. Ahava is so beautiful and powerful. It's a deep feeling of affection, but it's also a deep commitment, a decision to be with somebody no matter what. It's that longing to be with someone when you're not able to be with them, when you're just like, I don't care what else is going on. I just want to be with my person. That's ahava. But it's also that no matter what commitment, that I know things are rocky. I know we just had a fight, but when we get back together and we're going to talk about this, we're going to fight for each other, not just to fight for ourselves to win. Ahava, it's a deep feeling, but it's also a decision and commitment. I remember our last semester in college, Megan, my wife now, she got this great idea right after we got engaged to sign up for a study abroad program in Scotland. So like the last 4 months of our engagement, she was in Europe and I was in Marion, Indiana. I'm not bitter at all. No. But I remember we had all these big plans that we were going to we're going to make this work. We're even going to grow together even more. This is before FaceTime and Zoom, but we had this thing called Skype. And if you don't know what Skype is, God bless you. You really made it through. But we had like these planned Skype dates where we were going to connect every single day. And we had all this like calendar set up. It was going to be awesome. We tried our very first Skype date, her first day in Scotland. And it was like, and we're like, well, this didn't work at all. And I had great internet. And so I Googled Scotland's broadband. And they're like, Scotland trails the rest of the European Union in Wi-Fi. And I'm like, we should have known this yesterday. It was terrible. And we had all this time where we just couldn't communicate. We were away from each other for 4.5 months. I was taking 19 credit hours trying to graduate college early. It was this crazy, ridiculous season. But I just remember, like, in so many of those moments, in those 4.5 months, I just, like, felt that ahava. I just wish I was with her. I don't care. I just wanted to be in the same room with you, experiencing something together, just being with her. And I had this deep commitment that this was going to stink, but it was just going to be for a season. And I'm in it no matter what. I felt that ahava deep down in my soul. And that's a beautiful dimension of what love is. But that's not the only dimension. There's raya, friendship. There's ahava, that deep feeling and commitment. But there's also another layer of our relationships and experiencing true love, and it's called dode. Dode. On the count of 3, can you guys say dode? 1, 2, 3. watch your mouth. You kiss your mother with that mouth. Like, come on. And I say that because this is a sexually charged kind of love. This is physical pleasure. This is a sensual word. The word dode actually, it comes from this idea of, to boil something, to carouse, or even to fondle. That's what the word dode means. And we find the word dode all over the book of Songs, Song of Songs. Solomon says, your dode delights me, my treasure, my bride. Your dode, love, is better than wine, your perfume more fragrant than spices. Dode is where we get the Greek word eros, that we get the word eroticism or erotic from. It's sexual, sensual. It's full of these ideas of pleasure. And you know what? This is in your Bible, and this is in my Bible, and this is considered a beautiful thing. It's almost like the layers of love that Song of Songs give us are three flames that we need to have going all at the same time. A raya, friendship, ahava, that deep feeling of affection and commitment, but also dode as well. We need all three going so that we're truly living out that connection, true sexuality towards our partner, our spouse, that one. And we see how this is messed up, right? When those three flames aren't going. Maybe you or you know someone who's been in an affair situation to where they're just like full on dode. It's only dode. It's all about sex and pleasure, but there's no ahava. There's no deep commitment to that person. There's no raya. There's no even friendship. It's just like an exchange. And you see how that messes people up. And also in marriages, 10, 15, 30 years down the road where, yeah, there's ahava, there's commitment towards each other, but there's no physical intimacy, no dode. There's no raya, there's no building on that friendship at all. And so it's just off kilter. It's not the way it was supposed to be. Hear me, my friends. You and I were created for all three of those loves. For friendship, for that commitment, and for the fire, the boiling of dode. God created you for that. And it's not evil, it's not wrong, it is beautiful, and it is powerful. So a few implications I want us to grab from this that hopefully, I hope this just gets to your heart, soul level understanding about sexuality, the way that God wants us to see it. The first is this. Your sexuality is a good gift from a good God. Think of it, you guys. Like, how do we see God as this cosmic killjoy when he's commanding his people to do it? When he puts this, sexually charged poetry inside of the scriptures explaining the romance between a man and a woman. This is a beautiful, powerful thing. And your God, our Heavenly Father, wants us to experience this good gift. He could have invented so many different ways of procreation that did not feel good at all, and he chose not to. Sex, you guys, and your sexuality is not a dirty thing. It is not an evil thing. Your sexual desires are not evil, nor are they dirty. They are beautiful, and they are sacred because it is a good gift from a good God. Your God created and designed your body for sexuality in its proper context. Now, this is something that we're really excited about. We're excited about getting this message to the next generation, so much so that next Sunday night, if you're a parent of a Bridgeway kid or a Bridgeway student, we're having a parent meeting. We're calling it How to Have the Talk and Keep It Going. Because it's not just a one-time talk. Hopefully, we're going to gather parents together. If any age kid, if you just want to get ahead of the curve, especially elementary age kids, middle school and high schoolers, or if you're a grandparent who's parenting for the second time around, we think this is another powerful opportunity for you. But we want to help you and equip you to have the talk. I think back to my dad having the talk with me, and it was so bad, and he was just so ill-equipped. I remember he had like a Bible in his hand, and his hand was trembling. He was so nervous about it. He found like one verse about how we shouldn't have sex, and it just sort of shamed me a little bit, and he hated it, I hated it. I didn't remember anything, right? We want to equip you as parents to get ahead of the ball, to help your kids hear a better story, to understand that sex is a beautiful gift, but it's something that has a context, and it's something that is powerful as well. I think this is going to be a powerful thing. This is next Sunday at 5 p.m. You guys, do not miss this. It's going to be a night that hopefully will equip you for your next steps in leading your kids or your teenagers. It's going to be an awesome time. Nico, our next gen pastor, and myself are going to lead the way in that. The next thing we need to understand, implication about this, is this right here. That sex is a good gift from a good God, but sexuality is not God. Your sexuality, your sexual, current experience, your past experience, what you want, it is not everything. Sex is an incredible gift, but it will not satisfy you. Sex is a beautiful gift from a good God, but it will not give you value and worth. And we can have a measure of control over our urges, that our urges are a beautiful, sacred thing, but we can actually control those in a way that where we're not making mistakes that dehumanize other people and just use other people as well. Sexuality is beautiful, but it is not God. It is not everything. Sexuality is powerful and it's precious, but it's also a little like giving an 11-year-old a Ferrari. You guys see what I'm saying there? A Ferrari is a pretty awesome thing, but you give it to an 11-year-old, there's going to be some damage done. Sexuality is a good gift from a good God, but it is not God. And there are ways that we can faithfully thrive and understand ourselves the way God made us to honor those around us and to honor ourselves and to honor God in the process. So sexuality is a good gift from a good God, but sexuality is not God. And the last thing I want you to hear is this, that you are more than just your sexuality. Oh man, I just wish everybody could hear this, because this is just so not what our culture is telling us right now, that you are more than just your sexuality. Your sexuality is powerful, it is sacred, but it is not all that you are. And so many of us, we run towards having sex to validate ourselves in search of feeling valuable or worthy. Or some of us have already made that mistake and we've crossed a line that we didn't want to cross. And then we feel like we're not valuable at all. We're not worthy at all, or we are just out of bounds of what God is doing in the world. But my friends, you are so much more than your sexual past, your sexual presence, or your sexual future. Because sex is not where you get your value in the first place. Sex is not where your value comes from at all. It's not where your value comes from. We've got that on the screen, right? Sex is not where your value comes from. We might think that our sex can't increase your value, but we think it will increase our value. We think that sex will decrease our value. If we've done something we're not supposed to do, it's going to be less valuable, but that's not the case, because sex can't increase your value or decrease your value, because it's not where your value comes from in the first place. David in the Old Testament knew where his value came from. He wrote this in the Psalms. He says, it's not from what I do or what I get. He says this, I praise you, God, because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. His value came from the fact that he was created and loved by the God of the universe. That's where your value comes from. Not from your sexual mistakes or your sexual conquests or whatever you want to call it. It comes from who God says that you are. And you know what? You and I, we know something that David doesn't even know about how valuable we are. Because David didn't know that God in human form, God in flesh, named Jesus, would come to earth and he would live and walk among us. And he would go to a cross and die for us in this ultimate act of surrender and love to show us that this is where our value actually comes from, is what Jesus does for us and what he thinks about us. And that is what is so beautiful. I want you to hear this, that your sexuality is not where your value comes from. If you've chosen singleness, or you're in a season of singleness that you didn't choose and you don't want, I want you to know that you are still worthy and you are valuable because your Heavenly Father says so. If you don't have dode in your season of life right now, and that flame is just not even going, you are so valuable and you are so worthy because Jesus died for you as you were. If you've used sex to validate yourself, man, you are so worthy. You are still worthy of God's love, and you are so valuable. If you've used sex to prop up a relationship, you are still worthy and you are so valuable, not because I say so, but because the God of the universe says so. If you've not acted in sexual integrity, and you've sinned against yourself or hurt somebody else, oh, you are still worthy. It does not make you less worthy or valuable. God still has a plan for your life, and you can still faithfully thrive in your sexuality. You are more than your sexuality because your value doesn't come from your sexual behavior. It comes from what God says about you. Sexuality, you guys, it is a good gift from a good God, but it is not God, and there's a proper context for it. We're going to talk about that a lot next week. But I want you to hear that your value, your worth comes far beyond what your sexual past or present looks like. It's far beyond that. It's what God says about you. Maybe, just maybe, our culture, in this cultural moment, they have no idea what true love and true sexuality looks like the way that we discovered today in Song of Songs. I mean, they're selling it short, saying it's just a physical thing. They don't understand it's raya, it's friendship, it's ahava, it's deep commitment, and it's physical sexual love as well. You guys, why should we let the enemy take what God said was so powerful and precious and tarnish it? I say, let's ask the question, where did all the sexy Christians go? Because we should be owning this issue because of what our God has given us. And I say that as a joke, but not really. Let's be people that tell a better story, that live a better story, that honors ourselves and honors others, and helps our kids and our grandkids see that sex is beautiful, precious, powerful, sacred, holy. And it's a good gift from our good God.